Our lectionary has us in John chapter 12. I'll be reading verses 20 through 26. Now, among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks, and they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew, then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor." Well, as we're moving towards the cross through Lent, it would be good for you to be aware that in John 12 today, we have Jesus' last public discourse, his last public discourse. As Jesus reflects upon his own death in this passage, I would like to use this as a springboard for each of us to reflect on our own death. But before we get into that, there is an interesting detail in this passage I don't want to quickly pass over. The passage starts, "Now when those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks." Now, we don't know for sure whether these Greeks referred to were Hellenistic Jews or Gentile seekers, but I suspect that they were Greek converts to Judaism. And what is of special interest is they make a request to see Jesus on their way to a religious celebration. Even though they probably grew up religious, right now, they just wanted to see Jesus. I have no idea what their complex motivations might have been, but it is clear that they were intensely curious about all they'd heard about Jesus. All we know is that they wanted an encounter with, an experience of Jesus. We read that they came to Philip and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." They didn't come to Philip asking for information about Jesus. You hear the difference? It's not more information. They just wanted to see Jesus. This is a good reminder for me as an interim pastor. A pastor friend of mine told me about the pulpit of a church where he once served. And as he climbed up into the pulpit each week, these very words were carved into the wood of the pulpit right in front of him for him to look at. "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." And I think I get it. As you were drawn to this place, I have to believe that there is more animating you than a simple desire for more information. You need an encounter with Jesus. Okay, well, it might seem like I'm about to make a big switch now, but that's because it starts with a big switch in the text itself. After the request to see Jesus, we know that Jesus responded immediately with a very curious statement. He answered, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Now, if there was any doubt about what Jesus was alluding to, this doubt would be resolved in verse 33, where this whole section concludes. He said all this to indicate the kind of death that he was to die. Clearly, Jesus' impending death, it was on his mind. I think that Jesus was both preparing his disciples for what was about to happen to him so that they might make sense of it more at some future point, but he was also modeling something, preparing them and modeling something. Many of us are well versed in looking at all this theologically, but while systematic theology is of interest to some, that is not what I want to dwell upon this morning. We frequently forget the claim of Jesus' full humanity. Oh, we're quick to call him divine or the Son of God, but we forget the claim to his full humanity. So, humanly speaking, how many of us could be staring at death in the face and be reflective enough to say, well, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. I suspect not many could be so reflective. So I would say that my call today is to help you learn to befriend death, to discuss it in an open and relaxed manner so that it no longer haunts you. Henri Nouwen writes, I have a deep sense, hard to articulate, that if we could really befriend death, we would be free people. Our lives would be significantly different if we could relate to death as a familiar guest rather than a threatening stranger. Many people seem never to befriend death and die as if they were losing a hopeless battle. But we do not have to share that sad fate. I think a major reason why Jesus was able to face his death so was because, as I have said from time to time before, he knew exactly who he was. He knew he was the beloved of God, a theme I've often highlighted. He did not have a small image of self and entitlement to cling to. He did not have any sense of being robbed for his right to live a full life when he died at 33. He did not have any sense of disappointment that he would not live to see the launch of a great new movement. He was able to let go and simply let a grain of wheat fall into the earth and die. How freeing to be able to let go. Henri Nouwen also writes, some people live long lives, some die very young. Is a long life better than a short life? What truly counts is not the length of our lives, but their quality. Jesus was in his early 30s when he was killed. Teresa of Lisieux was in her 20s when she died. Anne Frank was a teenager when she lost her life, but their short lives continue to bear fruit long after their deaths. A long life is a blessing when it is well lived and leads to gratitude, wisdom, and sanctity. But some people can live truly full lives, even when their years are few. I think I've mentioned this to you before, but personally, I've always felt that one indicator of my success as a pastor is determined by my ability to help you better to prepare for your own death. Not sure how well I'm doing in that department, but that's my desire. When someone finally grasps that maybe they only have a few weeks left to live, let's say, I've observed different responses. Some are filled with anxiety, while some have a sense of acceptance. And I didn't say resignation, acceptance. Some are highly alert, sensing that they are experiencing something they are actually being drawn to. Sometimes I feel I can help people at that time, but much more so, I have wished I could have helped them long before that time. So many of these lessons are best learned long before your final hours. In the language of spirituality, we talk about learning to die before you die. Learning to die before you die. In addition to giving his disciples clues about his own death, Jesus was also trying to teach us, about the mystery of life and death. The Message translation of this passage reads, "Listen carefully. Unless a grain of wheat is buried in the ground, dead to the world, it is never any more than a grain of wheat. In the same way, anyone who holds on to life, just as it is, destroys that life. But if you let it go, reckless in your love, you'll have it forever, real and eternal." So how do we prepare to die? Much more than reading about any doctrine of the afterlife, more than memorizing certain verses over and over again, this is a matter of spirituality, of learning to let go of our sense of entitlement, learning to let go of my life, and ultimately learning to look into the eyes of Jesus. Wayne Mueller writes, "When you use all your strength to fight your death, you are losing all the energy you have left to live. We mistakenly believe that if we accept our deaths, we will begin to die. But curiously, the reverse is true. When we accept we are already dying, we are set free to live." This is what I mean by learning to die before you die. On a parallel note, Richard Rohr writes, "There is a certain fear of death that comes from not having lived yet. I had to face it myself when I had cancer a few years ago. I don't think I was afraid of death at the time because I knew I had already lived. Once you know you have touched upon this mystery of life, you are not afraid of death. There is an existential terror about losing what you've never found. Something in me says I haven't done it yet. I haven't experienced the stream of life yet. I haven't touched the real, the good, the true, the beautiful, which is, of course, what we were created for." Quoting Henri Nouwen yet again, "Am I afraid to die? I am every time I let myself be seduced by the noisy voices in my world telling me that this little life is all I have and advising me to cling to it with all my might. But when I let these voices move to the background of my life and listen to that small, soft voice calling me the beloved, I know that there is nothing to fear and that dying is the greatest act of love, the act that leads me into the eternal embrace of my God, whose love is everlasting." He's using the language that I've tried to teach before when Henri Nouwen refers to the soft voice calling me the beloved, that's what I refer to as the true self, who you truly are, who you are in God's eyes. When he talks about the noisy voices in my world telling me that my little life is all that I have, that's a reference to the small self or the false self. When you are ready to let this seed fall into the ground, to still the noisy voices in your head that insist that this little life is all that there is, then you are ready to be reckless in your love. Then you're ready to turn your eyes upon Jesus. As the hymn says, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. So as we prepare to wrap things up, it seems as though we've come full circle in our hopes to befriend death, in our hopes to live and love with abandon. We find ourselves having a lot in common with those Greeks on the way to a religious festival. Remember them? They weren't looking to debate theology. They simply said to Philip, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." And that's where I would leave you today. And when you see Jesus, may it be more than looking at an example of stoicism. May your perspective on death be corrected by looking into the eyes of the one who has loved you with an everlasting love.